Hey everyone, this is Daniel, and this video is my Scala Days 2025 presentation, which is titled A New Scala Ethos. And the reason why you're not seeing this on the Scala Days channel is because apparently for whatever reason my recording was lost at Scala Days 2025, which is why I'm recording this again. And I'm recording it in my little studio here. And the good news is that I have a little bit more freedom. I have no time constraints. I'm not in front of a large live audience. And this talk is a little bit different than I normally do at conferences, because normally I do deep technical talks and live coding. And this talk is a little bit more philosophical. It's by no means prescriptive, but it means to start a conversation around what Scala is and Scala's strengths and some basic foundations on which Scala can build its future success. This is the goal of the presentation, and I'm very interested in hearing what you guys think after watching this presentation, so I'm going to look at pretty much all the comments in this video. I'm going to also share it on Reddit and all the socials and whatnot, and I'm very interested in hearing what you guys think. So please enjoy A New Scala Ethos. So here it goes. All right, so the goal of this presentation is to establish a couple of foundational principles on top of which Scala can build its future success, given the fact that Scala faces increasing challenge from within and without the tech ecosystem. At this point, Scala turns 21, which means that by the Lindy effect, Scala will stick around proportionate to its current lifetime, and Scala is at this point older than most languages, surprisingly, but Scala doesn't hold too much of an element of surprise anymore, because most of its great ideas have been taken from into other languages, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So you could think of Scala as a young adult with great potential, good technical merit, but in need of clarity and focus if it is to succeed in the real world. And I'm going to talk about what those elements might be. So a bit of history is in order because Scala is old enough to warrant 2 minutes of history. So the golden era of Scala was around the 20-teens, when Scala came to the programming languages ecosystem with a very nice recipe comprising a nice blend of functional programming and object-oriented programming, type inference, which is about the best in class, record types, so case classes, very nice and very powerful pattern matching, implicits, higher kinds, so extreme expressiveness in abstraction power, and type gymnastics, which basically allow you to do type-level programming, which you can also see here on the Rock the JVM channel. This type-level programming thing is very, very powerful. At the same time, around the same period, Scala came with, or the Scala ecosystem came with some killer apps or killer frameworks like Apache Spark and Akka for distributed systems. And then we had Kafka and Flink, also based on Scala. Then Play framework, which at one point was very, very popular for building web applications, and very magical libraries based on the magical features of Scala, including the experimental macros in Scala 2, and the expressive power of the Scala language. So at that point, Scala was at its peak. So it was very powerful, it was very popular, everybody was saying good things about it, developers were in love, the ideas from Scala were spreading to other languages, so at that point, Scala was at the peak of its success. Now, in the 2020s, most of what's made Scala a great productive language, like the FP and OOP blend, type inference, record types, pattern matching, was increasingly stolen by other languages like Java and Kotlin, increasingly so. Contextual abstractions replaced the ambiguous implicit keyword in Scala 3. The same higher kinds and type gymnastics are about the best in class, and Scala 3 came with a new macro system, which is, again, top of its class for a statically typed language. And I talk about this in my macros and metaprogramming course. You can build incredible stuff with macros in Scala 3, so it's super, super powerful. However, as you can see here on the screen, most of the productivity features of Scala were taken from other languages, and what were killer apps in the 20-teens started to move away from Scala. So Apache Spark invested a large amount of effort into bringing PySpark parity, both feature parity and performance parity. So pretty much all PySpark jobs in Apache Spark are almost at performance parity with the JVM, which is absolutely incredible. So it's very easy for data scientists and data engineers to write Apache Spark jobs in Python as opposed to Scala. Akka switched their business license, and that alienated a part of the community. Kafka and Flink switched to Java exclusive APIs. The Play framework was almost ghosted for a while. It's still maintained, and the trajectory of Play framework is that one of stability, so it's okay. But no new features have been added for, I think it was a good few years, if not 10 years or so. The magical libraries are still a killer features of the Scala ecosystem, and magical libraries like the type-level ecosystem, effect systems, and whatnot are still at the cutting edge of what's possible in statically typed programming language, and that's great. But the magical libraries of the 2010s have seen various degrees of support with the change of Scala 3. Most have migrated, and most are okay. And the Scala ecosystem overall is stable, but the hype is not as big as it was in the 2010s. So this is the state of affairs in the 2020s, and as this recording is being produced. So where is Scala now? I tried to differentiate Scala by its killer features. So Scala differentiates itself by its top-of-the-line features because the productivity stuff in Scala were taken by other languages like Kotlin and Java. So the differentiator between Scala and other languages are still the top-of-the-line contextual abstractions, higher kinds, type gymnastics, the new macro system, which is really, really great, and also effect systems, which very rarely do you see an equivalent of effect systems in other languages. So this is what makes Scala special. Now, the kind of audience that is very easily catered to by the Scala ecosystem at this point is what I call the FP purist. So just as a broad overgeneralization, so this is very imprecise, but by and large correct, the FP purist is a very experienced software engineer, generally with a decade or more of programming experience, strong mathematical background, and generally very gritty in terms of developer experience. So they can tolerate crappy DX as long as the code compiles and the types are correct, and they can tolerate crappy IDEs. They can very easily code in Notepad and compile from the command line and stuff like that. And they also write very compact, very powerful Scala code that do a lot. So their code is generally very succinct, and that code is extremely powerful. If you look at that sort of definition, this is what these guys eat for breakfast, and the kind of phrasing of the sort that monads are monoids in the category of endofunctors is common jargon. Okay. And just as a piece of joke, these guys have written at least one monad tutorial because writing monad tutorials is a basic human need, right above food and water and shelter. There's the need to write a monad tutorial, and I am guilty as charged. I have no less than 3 monad tutorials here on the Rock the JVM channel, so you can call me out for that. And you can also check them out. They might get you new understanding. In any case, this is the kind of audience that Scala caters to at this moment based on just the differentiating factors. Now, it looks as though Scala is strictly for these guys, for FP purists, which makes it extremely powerful for the right people with the right experience, but it's very hard to learn those top-of-the-line things, these top contextual abstractions, the macro system, the higher kinds, the implicit abstractions, and whatnot. And this gives the impression that Scala overall is very hard to learn, which is not factually true because Scala, to be productive, takes right about a weekend to learn. And you're going to be as productive with Scala as you are with your preferred language. I guarantee that. I have my own students at Rock the JVM proving that. So Scala by itself, just to be a productive software engineer and really run normal code, is not that hard, but there's the impression that Scala is hard to learn because you only see the differentiating factors, which are indeed difficult and they take a lot of time to learn. So the general perception makes it so that Scala is difficult to learn, and our job as the Scala community is changing that perception. And normally the way that you would think we could change that sort of perception is through marketing. So people have spoken on various channels, on Twitter and Reddit and in in-person conversation and conferences, that Scala needs more marketing. Okay, what does marketing mean in this sense? Well, normally marketing means broadcasting your idea to people. So it would mean speaking at conferences, producing a lot of content, broadcasting stuff on various channels like Hacker News and Reddit, going viral, and getting a lot of people and producing a lot of hype in whatever shape or form you imagine that. Up until the point that somebody might yell that Scala is back, or Scala is on the hype train again, or insert your favorite influencer saying that Scala is the way to go, and that would mean that marketing is successful. So the marketing that I hear people talk about is in these terms. Now, I want to clarify something. Scala does have or Scala would be served by additional marketing, but this is not what marketing means to me. This is not how I practiced marketing. And I'm going to spend a little time defining and clarifying what marketing would mean for Scala to be successful in terms of these three words: clarity, empathy, and delight. And I'm going to clarify what these mean. Marketing is not about shouting louder, or posting more. It's about understanding your audience and giving them what they want. It's not about sticking a Scala sticker on a Tesla or whatever. It's about figuring out who your audience is, figuring out what they want, and giving them exactly what they want to the point where they can say, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to tell my friends about it, which was the case in the 2010s. And it could very easily be the case now, given Scala's technical merit. So I'm going to explain what these terms mean. First, clarity. Clarity means defining who you are and who your audience is. So who is this for? This meaning the Scala programming language, or the Scala ecosystem, or the Scala suite of libraries. A very tempting answer would be that Scala is a cross-paradigm programming language that can produce anything, and that's true, which would mean that it's very tempting to say that Scala is for everybody. But that would be a very poor answer. And I want to make a music analogy. I am pretty sure that you know who these people are. These people are some of the biggest superstars in the world, and they produce music for everybody. There are very few people on this planet that have not heard at least one song from Ed Sheeran or Taylor Swift. These people are for everybody. But before they were for everybody, they were for somebody. In other words, they practiced very clearly, and they very, very clearly defined their genre. So Taylor Swift, before she was a massive superstar, she was a country singer. Ed Sheeran, he still describes himself as a gingerhead singer-songwriter with a small guitar and a loop pedal. And that is a very clearly defined genre. And then they expanded from that inner core. So in terms of programming language, or in terms of what Scala could be, we need to understand, or we need to ask ourselves what genre Scala is. Because Scala, being a general purpose programming language, as you'd see on Wikipedia, is a very easy but very lazy and poor answer. Because if everybody is your customer, nobody is your customer. And in other words, if you cater to every programmer, no programmer will touch Scala. And that would be very bad and a shame, really, for Scala's technical merit. So I wanted to define potential genres for Scala. And genres include a very broad category, for example, functional programming languages or object-oriented languages, or a Haskell on the JVM, which is what the FP purist audience kind of describe Scala for. So potential genres for Scala would be this FP plus OOP blend, which made Scala extremely productive and then inspired other languages like Java and Kotlin to be increasingly cross-paradigm. So if you define Scala as FP plus OOP, you would define a genre, but then you would face quite a bit of competition because a lot of mainstream programming languages are now cross-paradigm in this sense, at least FP plus OOP. If you define yourself as this FP pure on the JVM, like a Haskell on the JVM, you differentiate yourself by your top features, which is what I was talking about earlier. This is very clear, very niche, but it's an accidental answer because the Scala programming language never really intended to land on that particular genre. So this is why I call this audience, the FP purists, as an accidental audience, and this Haskell on the JVM as an accidental genre, okay? Now, one potential way of defining genre in Scala is to let people choose. But if you ask what people choose, they would choose very different things. And incidentally, the question of what Scala is about pops up every once in a while on Reddit, for example. So this sort of question, can anyone explain me what Scala is about? Who is Scala? What does Scala do well? And things like that pops every few weeks on Reddit. You can search. There are many questions that look very similar to this one. And without any exception, every single time somebody asks a question, you get piles of answers. And I'm going to give some examples here. This is one. Scala is a JVM language with cross-functional and object-oriented programming paradigms. You can use it nearly pure or less hassle Java. Okay. I believe Martin Odursky, who said that Scala is a language that can grow with you. Okay, so it's whatever you want. All about fun and productivity. From circuit design to script, back-end to front-end, you can just have Scala do all of these. Again, this is true, but it's saying almost nothing. I would describe Scala as a good toolbox for exploring programming styles with excellent cross-platform support. I'm going to touch on cross-platform support versus cross-paradigm support a little bit later in the presentation. But again, this is a different description. This one is my favorite. Scala is a religion. In other words, nobody can really define what Scala is, and I think we need, as a Scala community, to define what Scala is and what it can do well. This is one of the core principles of marketing. Just define yourself very well, cater and define your audience. So I wanted to start defining Scala based on what Scala does very well, underratedly so. For example, Scala does backend extremely well. It blends safety and convenience. These are two very important keywords that I want you to remember. Safety and convenience, and also expressiveness and productivity, because they are not at odds with one another. So backend is something that Scala does very, very well. And many companies are using Scala for their critical pieces. So banking systems and transactions and stuff like that is done very well in Scala. Scala JS, which is the front-end Scala to JS compiler, is underratedly stable, extremely stable. In my Scala Days talk, I happened to have Sebastian Duran in the room watching this presentation, and he's the lead maintainer of the lead developer of Scala JS, and he will literally not drink water if he sees a bug report. There is a zero bug policy on Scala JS, and Sebastian will simply crush every single bug that he or anybody sees on Scala JS. And the value of having a shared domain model between the front end and the back end expressed as algebraic data types in Scala is an underrated superpower. So you can keep the same expressiveness plus the functional programming primitives plus the expressive power of the entire language in backend and frontend for web applications, for example, and that's underrated. So Scala JS is extremely stable and extremely well built. Scala Native is also popping up. It's not 1.0 yet, but it's very promising. And generally, the Scala language has all the tools for pretty much every single piece of software that you need. You can script, you can write macro-based libraries, you can build scientific tools, you can build UI applications, you can build games, you can build engines, you can build, there's this library for building hardware. So you can build pretty much anything you want in Scala. And it's scalable in the sense that you can start with a script. So you can script something very quickly in Scala as opposed to Python. It's very easy to script something and stay within the language as your product grows. So you can script something, you can build an MVP, and then you can build a product, and then you can scale it within the Scala ecosystem. This is what a scalable language means. This is unlike the, let's say, more traditional way of bootstrapping a product, which is what you would do in without knowing what Scala is. You would script something in Python, and then after you build your MVP in like React and whatever, you then move your backend to Java because Python is pretty much unsustainable in large backends with very minor exceptions. So this is a shame because Scala is extremely powerful and allows you to do all of it within the same language and within the same ecosystem. So these are some areas where Scala shines and it's underrated. And these could serve as foundations for what Scala can be as a definition. So I would like to start describing the genre and the punchline of what Scala is and who it can cater for by describing the genre. For example, cross-platform, so front and back end, safe and convenient, so safety and convenience, these are two critical keywords in the description of Scala. Functional programming plus OOP, because it has been battle-tested for more than a decade, I would say multiple decades now. So FP plus OOP, safety and convenience, and cross-platform, I think would much clearly define Scala as a genre with a broad audience, but with a very clearly defined core. So who would that audience be? Those would be, ideally, full-stack developers, or at least developers who can work either on back-end or the front-end, who need these sort of things, safety and convenience, who think in terms of FP plus OOP, which is at this point in 2025, as I'm recording this presentation, most of developers. If you're writing TypeScript, you know FP plus OOP. Okay, so this would be the audience. Now, if you want to grow your audience, you would start from a minimal viable audience, which would be a slight variation of this, which would be back-end first developers, because that's where Scala has been battle-tested the most, even though Scala.js is also very, very powerful on the front end. Backend has been historically Scala's strength. So you would define the minimal viable audience in terms of these features. So FP plus OOP as a thinking pattern in these people, safety and convenience, and the sort of backend first approach. Now, the viable audience, I've put here on the slide the dev version, because you can also think of a viable audience in terms of the industry as a company version. So companies adopt programming languages for building their products and making money. So you would see companies as potential customers of Scala from a different angle. So the minimal viable audience in terms of companies would look something like this, a slight variation of this, but it would be back-end first products or companies who need safety and convenience, which in their case means productivity because you can make money easily, who ship important code at scale. This is a slight variation of the previous definition, because a company doesn't really care about FP and OOP. They only want their products to work. They need a few bugs. They need things to work well, generally. So this would be the kind of company or the kind of product that would need Scala. If you want to ship important code at scale that works with few bugs, and safety and productivity, so ship quickly, backend first, because that's where Scala has been historically the best, this would be your minimal viable audience in terms of companies. Okay. Now, how do you define Scala for these people? Now, what I'm about to show you is a phrasing that I landed upon while talking to programmers from other audiences or from other ecosystems. I spoke at Java user groups, for example, and they asked me why Scala. And I landed upon this sort of definition, that Scala is extremely powerful. It is an extremely powerful language because it allows you to write very powerful code safely and conveniently, so without too much hassle. and this is the scalability part that I was talking about earlier. You can get started with Scala, script something, and then stay within the ecosystem no matter how large your code ends up being or becoming. Okay, so this is the punchline. Scala helps you write software safely and conveniently, and you can get started very quickly because there are tools to do that, and grow within the Scala ecosystem as you go, no matter how big your scale becomes. Okay, so that was the clarity piece, how clearly you define Scala as a language. Now, once you've defined your audience, both in terms of companies and developers, because these are the people that adopt Scala, they make bets on Scala for either their products or their business and their careers, respectively, you need to empathize with them and understand what they need, where they are, and meet them there. So the question that you need to ask while empathizing with people is understanding what they need. This is core to what I've been doing at Rock the JVM. I tried to deliver learning materials based on where people were in their careers or in their understanding of this ecosystem and give them what they want. So asking what do you need is the core piece of empathy. Now, just as a TLDR, these are what I've understood both companies and developers need. I'm both a developer and a company, as a one-person company. So I do understand that developers want stable tooling because they don't want to blow their head just compiling code. They want fast feedback loops, and they want the language to get out of their way, which Scala does that beautifully, except in IDEs where everything shows red and you don't know why. That is something that you need to prioritize. So developers want stable tooling, fast feedback loops, very powerful and solid libraries that they can depend on, and not eating their brain power, understanding dependencies or various changes or chaotic things that may have happened with the libraries, and also clear documentation and learning resources, which I, as Rock the JVM, have tried to contribute with to help people understand various pieces of the Scala ecosystem more clearly and more easily. On the other side, on the side of companies want primarily, this is the topmost need that I've heard company representatives talk about. They want access to talent or access to Scala developers. Companies very often complain that they cannot find skilled Scala developers, and that's a legitimate need. And we, as the Scala community, especially the leadership, need to make this a little bit more visible to them and make it easier for companies to spot Scala talent. They also want stable releases because they don't want to bet their business or their product on zero-dot libraries, although some Scala libraries have been so stable that even zero-dot libraries have been battle tested in production many times over, and HTTP4S is one of those examples. They also want clear roadmaps because they want predictability, and measurable performance also part of their predictability. So as far as I can tell from all the conversations that I've had with people, these are the primary needs of the two sides of the Scala audience. Now, the goal of Scala as a product for these people is to provide them delight, which means that these people or these companies need to say some form of "this is awesome." I'm going to tell my friends, Scala is amazing, we love you, how can we help, how can we contribute, and whatnot. So delight in terms of a product means supplying your audience, at least, or start from, the one thing that makes the rest look less relevant or less painful. In terms of the audiences that I was describing, in terms of the audience of the developers and the companies, developers want stable tooling and other things, which can very easily free their mental burden and focus on what they do best and what they love, which is thinking and writing code and imagining powerful software. And companies want access to Scala developers and other things like the predictability stuff, which generally takes care of itself if a library or a library ecosystem is mature enough. So if you want to isolate the one thing that makes the rest look less painful, these would be, in my opinion, the two primary drivers of what would make Scala a success. Now, how would the delight, how would "this is awesome" look like? a developer might say, as I used to say in 2014 when I discovered Scala, oh my God, this is so amazing because I was in flow. I discovered this nice thing. Here's what I could build. Here's how I can think about this. Here's how I can abstract this, and then you can build this, and then you can scale this, and so on and so forth. Oh my God, three hours passed, and I forgot to eat and drink water. I'm gonna stop my laptop now. This would be an example of flow, of this is awesome from the developer's point of view. And from the company's point of view, a company might say, oh my God, this is awesome. We love Scala developers. We always find some good fits at whatever, Scala conferences or on the Scala official Scala job board or whatever. And these people are awesome. They write powerful software. The software never breaks and whatever. So that would be an example of delight from these two audiences. Now, as we are all part of the Scala community, we're part of this story of providing or helping in giving Scala audiences what they want. So I would say that the mantra of people like us do things like this would help a lot in standardizing stuff. So if you're part of the Scala leadership, you should probably set the tone of what good Scala is. In terms of tech leads, you should enforce standards in your team. Because we are all, both the audience and also the contributor to the Scala as the product, we need to provide feedback so that the Scala language and tooling can change and improve. And pretty much everybody to just use the official tools and improve them if they don't conform to your needs. We are software developers, and when we need to help with PRs if something breaks, or at least supply good bug reports. That would be tremendously helpful to the tooling authors or library authors. Now, in terms of library authors, now that I've landed on the subject, we need to focus on simplicity and productivity instead of very highly abstracted things. For example, the type level ecosystem gets a lot of criticism because they use this tagless final thing, which is very hard to understand. And that's a legitimate criticism. And I've tried to make that a little bit more approachable by providing educational content and explaining people what those definitions mean, but it's still intimidating to beginners. So as a library author, I would advise to focus on productivity and helping people get stuff done quickly, so conveniently and also safely, and write the documentation by example instead of writing like these very complicated like Kleisleys and category theories and whatnot. These are not tremendously helpful unless you have a year at your disposal to understand all of that stuff, all the foundations, and then dive deeper into the libraries in question. In terms of teaching and learning materials, you should strive to flatten the learning curve as much as possible, and this is also a piece of advice that I would give to documentation authors. And from my point of view of Rock the JVM, I try to do this as much as possible, hopefully with some success, and try to use the Pareto law, the 80-20, for choosing the language features or libraries to use rather than looking at everything at a whole and getting intimidated by shutting your laptop, throwing the table, and whatnot. And focus on how people can get productive quickly with the essential Scala features. Okay, so just use foundational Scala, not necessarily the most magical things, to get people powerful software delivered quickly, which is what I've tried to do at my latest course, which is Scala Projects. I've tried to help people produce things that they would use, like image processors or AI agents or static site generators that they can publish, and file synchronizers and full-stack Scala apps with just the minimal Scala features. This is something that I've tried to contribute with, and I'm going to leave in a description a link to the Scala Projects course if you want to take a look at it, if you want to get started with Scala quickly and get productive with it. In any case, here's how I think Scala could win. I think Scala could win by ethos, meaning a good definition of what Scala is, who's it for, and what is it best in class for, and a general standardizing of how we as Scala developers do things. For example, the Python audience has a loose concept of Pythonic, which doesn't really have a really solid definition, but everybody seems to get it. I think we can do even better than that. So I think we could win by this sort of ethos. We are Scala. We are best at this, and we do things like this. And also by delighting the minimal viable audience in terms of what I described earlier. So fixing or improving developer experience and then everything else, providing access to Scala talent and everything else, and continuous feedback and fast improvement. Now, a question to ask when adding or removing or making any changes to the Scala ecosystem and the Scala language is trying to understand which purpose it serves. So for example, effect systems are great and they're very powerful. They've been very proven, but new effect systems are a very small niche for FP purists, which is the first audience that we discussed earlier. If you're thinking about adding more complex features to the language, you should probably think again, because even though magical features are powerful and mind-blowing, they can probably restrict the audience even further and make Scala have the increasing perception that it's hard to learn. So capture checking is very, let's say, very powerful and mind-blowingly so, but it adds points for safety at the cost of convenience. And we want, in the Scala ecosystem or in the Scala language, we want both. We want both safety and convenience, which means that we should make these features very easily available, very easily teachable, and very easily understandable in real code so that every developer gets it without too much effort. That's the idea. And the same goes for syntax changes. At this point, there are many ways of doing the same thing, many alternative syntaxes, even different styles of Scala, which I think can add to confusion. And I think we should clarify what's what. And definitely don't add new syntax, because that would probably exacerbate the problem. Now, here's a potential set of pillars on top of which we can build a Scala ethos. Again, this presentation is not necessarily prescriptive of what the definition should be, but rather some suggestions. So, identity. This is the definition of what Scala is. And here are some suggestions for a potential punchline: the ability to write powerful software with safety and convenience, and the ability to scale. So get started very quickly. You can script something very easily and then stay within the Scala ecosystem as your product, as your code base grows. Defining the genre and the audience, because these two concepts go hand in hand. These are some suggestions for potential definitions of what the audience might be. We talked about that earlier. How to delight them. So give them what they want. Give developers very, very nice developer experience, and give companies access to talent. This is probably the number one thing to prioritize. In terms of implementation, there are many things to improve and there are many things to work on. They probably derive from the ethos. So that was my presentation. This is a set of principles on top of which Scala can build future success. I hope that you like this presentation, and I'm eager to see your comments in this video or wherever social this video lands upon. This is Daniel signing off, and I'll talk to you soon.